You may be able to find similar lines of code in the main function of many Geom4 examples. They are used to specify two different modes to run Geom4, based on the number of arguments you put behind the Geom4 executable. If you run the Geom4 executable with one argument behind it, which could be a text file that contains many Geom4 macro commands, Geom4 will go to the batch mode. That is, it will run in a terminal and quit immediately after finishing its job, without any user interference in between. If you run the command without any argument in the terminal, or double-click it in your file browser, Geom4 will run in the interactive mode. That is, it will provide you either a graphic user interface, or GUI, or a command line interface, or CLI, where you can type in Geom4 macro commands to perform your simulation task. The default user interface on Windows, provided by the latest Geom4 version, is a native Windows GUI. You will get it without any setup. In other platforms, most Geom4 applications will list all available UI types when you run the program. If some of them are not listed here, it simply means that they are not enabled in your system. The available UIs or user interfaces are listed in the Geom4 book for application developers. It also explains how to select interface in your application. If your application is written well, you should be able to use the environment variables to select your preferred UI. If you are in a Mac or Linux, you can also use the .g4 session file in your home directory to make more complicated setups. To set up the environment variables on a Windows machine, search for env in your Start menu and launch the control panel to edit the system environment variables. You can add a new or edit an existing user variables for yourself. You can type in the variable name here, g4ui underscore use underscore Qt or win32 based on your preference. Given value number 1 to indicate that you would like to use it. On macOS or Linux, you need to use the command echo space $ shell to find out which shell is used in your terminal. A shell is a program that accepts your commands that you typed in your terminal. Note that the Linux and the Mac command line is case sensitive. So type in the command as it is. Don't change any case. Otherwise, the command may fail. If the output is bash, which is mostly the case for a Linux machine, you need to edit the bash configuration file .bashrc. If the output is Z shell, which is mostly the case in a Mac, you need to edit the Z shell configuration file .zshellrc. Note that the dot in front of those file names are part of the file name. Files start with a dot are hidden by default. You need to add a -a argument behind your ls command to see them. Historically, configuration files end with rc. So the .bashrc file is the configuration file for bash, and the .zshellrc file is that for zshell. As a second step, you need to add the following line in your shell configuration file: export space G4UI underscore use underscore Qt equal to 1. You can change Qt to any other UI that you prefer, for example, TCSH. After you save the configuration file, you need to restart your terminal for the setup to take effect. It is a bit complicated to choose your preferred UI using the environment variables. I prefer to use the .g4 session file instead in a Mac or Linux machine to set up my preferred UI. It is also a hidden file because it starts with dot. So you can either enable the Show Hidden Files option in your file browser or use the -A option in your terminal to see it. You can use either a text editor in the terminal or a graphic one to open it and type in your preferred UI names there. You can associate a particular gem, for example, with a particular UI, and the UI that has not associated with anything is the default type. Now that we know how to pick our preferred user interface, the next question is, which one is better? On Windows, the choice is obvious. You should just use the default native GUI, which requires no extra setup and is intuitive to use. But you do have to upgrade to the latest Gen 4.11 to have it. On other platforms, you may use Qt-based GUI, which is cross-platform. That is, it is available for Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. It is very similar to the Windows GUI, but slightly prettier in my opinion. It is very hard to enable, especially for newbies. GAG is a GUI as well, but is too old, and C Shell is too limited in its functionality. TC Shell is also a command line interface and is enabled by default on Mac and Linux. Now the question is whether TC Shell is way worse than a pretty GUI. It is nice to have a list of all available Gen 4 macro commands shown on the sidebar of a GUI, but you can easily get that list in TC Shell with a short command ls. You can unfold a command branch in a GUI, but you can do the same thing in TC Shell by cd into that directory and use ls to show its content. You can hover your mouse on a particular command in a GUI to show a short explanation of the command. But you can achieve the same thing using the help command in TC Shell. Finally, you can double-click on a command in the GUI to paste it into the input field. That's very handy, but you can also use the tab key to complete very long commands in TC Shell. To conclude, there is really no need to fight for a GUI if none is available on your system. The command line interface is as good if you know how to use it efficiently. As a piece of advice from an experienced user, you should just use the default, the easiest accessible one on your system, so that you can use your time to do your simulation instead of trying to enable a pretty GUI that does not come by default.